From the CISO Series, it's cybersecurity headlines.
AI automated malware campaigns coming soon. The US examines cyber psychology to outwit criminal hackers, and Barracuda urges replacing its email security gateways. These are some of the stories that my colleagues and I have been bringing to you on this week's cybersecurity headlines. And now we get a chance for some insight, some opinion, and definitely some expertise on these stories and more from our returning guest, Joshua Scott, the head of security and IT at Postman. Josh, thanks so much for being on the show.
Hey, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right, before we move on, we have to spend a moment and thank our sponsor for today, Trend Micro. Trend Micro, discover, assess, mitigate. Remember to join us on YouTube Live. To do so, go to CISOseries.com. It's the easiest way. Just hit the events drop down, look for the Cybersecurity Headlines Week in Review image. It is and will remain the third one down. Just click on to join us, and you'll be seeing my smiling face and joining in our chat. Please join us. It's a lot of fun. Let's get into it. We got about 20 minutes and on to our first story. AI automated malware campaigns coming soon. Cybersecurity pioneer Mikko Hyppönen, in an interview with CSO Online, states it is mandatory for cybersecurity industry to embrace AI technology. It will only be a matter of months before malicious threat actors use widely available AI source code to perfect their techniques for complete automation of malware campaigns. With the career literally as old as or older than the web, came out 2 years after he started his career. By the time all of this came about, this is definitely a voice that we want to listen to. But indeed, this does threaten to become kind of old news. I'm curious, Josh, with an expert of this stature speaking, what should happen and what do you think will happen with the industry in terms of AI automation for threat actors?
I mean, I think AI automation for threat actors, that's been happening already. I think they've been leveraging those tools. They are powerful. They give you a lot of capabilities that you may not have had before. So now they've got this whole new set of capabilities that they didn't have, right? So they've been exploring this for a while, is my guess. It's something we're doing from a security standpoint. We've got to find ways to leverage this technology and use it as another tool in the arsenal. So I think I wouldn't say that it's going to happen at some point. I think it's already happening.
Is there a concern of like threat actors' ability to scale more quickly with use of this technology? They don't have to worry about things like access controls or worries about data leaking with like generative systems and stuff like that. Is that a concern of like able like for temporary scale advantage on this kind of
I
stuff?
mean, I think it gives them scale, but I also think it helps them, from a malware standpoint. Think about the fact that, one of the triggers before has been I can look at a piece of malware and see that it's been written improperly or there's language issues. But now you've got this, large language model that can actually really help you kind of, write something in, better clarity. So that's what they're going to be using it. Now, that's one of the use cases for it. So, you could probably think through quite a few others.
All right, well, next story here. U.S. research agency examines cyber psychology to outwit criminal hackers. A new project at the Intelligence Advanced Research Projects Activity Center is trying to understand hackers' psychology, discover their blind spots, and build software that exploits these deficiencies to improve computer security. Building on this theme of human weakness that cybercriminals themselves exploit all the time, the initiative is an open competition inviting expert teams to submit proposals for how they would study hackers' psychological weaknesses and then build software exploiting them. It's a really interesting idea. I got a simple question for you, Josh. What do you think?
I think it's an interesting idea. I will say that. I think the psychological aspect of security. We consider that from a defensive standpoint and from just how we get across to our employees. So using that same type of approach to figure out how to prevent attacks and stop the attackers, I think it's interesting. And I'm very kind of eager to see what they come out of it and what kind of things come out of that competition because I could see that being used in interesting ways.
Yeah, I think of the ways that I've been surprised to see psychology like weaponized by threat actors, like things like ego, right? When they're using like job postings and stuff like that. A lot of that comes down to like people like to feel important, and I wonder how you
Yeah.
flip that around with a lot of more aggressive cyber operations that we're seeing from the government and other
Yeah.
actors as well.
I mean, I could see it being applied to, things like deception technology, right? And how do you actually put up, different types of fake content, same thing that they're doing, from attacking us, putting up fake content, doing the same thing back, right? So how
Mhm.
do you actually craft that type of message to get the attackers to want to go to the fake stuff? So I think that, what is it that entices them to want to go to that fake content?
All right, well, our next story here, Barracuda urges customers to replace vulnerable appliances immediately. Enterprise security company Barracuda Networks has now warned its customers against using email security gateway appliances impacted by a recently discovered zero-day exploit and to replace them immediately, even though the patch for the vulnerability, which had been exploited since October 2022, had been issued by Barracuda last month. They said, regardless of patch, just rip and replace. Josh, we have Brian Krebs actually posted on his blog, quoting other experts who called this action fairly stunning and adding that Barracuda customers are now coming to terms with the notion that foreign cyber spies probably have been hoovering up all their email for months. Curious, what's your take on all this?
I'd be terrified if I was a customer of Barracuda with this going on. If you've been siphoning up my email for since October of 22, if not earlier, that's scary. Think about all the type of content you have with an email, and then just the fact that the recommendation is to rip and replace. That does seem stunning. I'm surprised to hear something to that extent. I'm surprised that they can't find a way to fix it through their normal patching mechanisms or update mechanisms. So that I would not want to be in a customer's shoes at running Barracuda stuff right now.
Yeah, it's like SolarWinds level in terms
Yeah,
of
yeah,
like reputation damage in a way
mhm,
that you rarely see in this industry.
yeah. Talk about damage to trust. That's going to be difficult.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
So
Our next story here, Klopp likes to move it, move it. Microsoft's threat intelligence team has attributed the recent attack against the popular managed file transfer platform to the Klopp ransomware organization. It found the zero-day used in the attack followed similar behavior observed with Klopp in the past. Bleeding Computer and various security researchers observed attacks in the wild with this exploit over the Memorial Day weekend. So, Josh, this attack affected a number of high-profile companies, like including British Airways, who use Move It to securely transfer files around internal networks. What should CISOs do when they look at the third-party vendors they use or are considering using in their organizations? This doesn't seem to be just a Move It issue. We've seen managed file transfers services hit with these kind of attacks before too.
yeah, I mean, anything that's in your environment that is not from your company, that's not something that you created, you've got to be on top of it. You've got to stay on top of those vendors. You got to have an understanding of what the risk is that they bring, and you got to work through some of those, kind of scenarios and contingencies on what happens. How do I actually mitigate the risk? That if this data were to leak, if this system or this service were to be compromised. But I think every vendor, no matter how big or small, is at risk for pretty much every company. It definitely causes it keeps me up at night, I'll tell you that. So, with just so many different vendors that are out there, and we use a lot of vendors for a lot of different things, and some of them are point solutions. And all it takes is, one slip up, one vendor to do something like that, and all of a sudden you're on the news. And I really don't want us to be on there.
Yeah, I mean, going back to the Barracuda story, it's kind of part and parcel with that, and it's yeah, I can see why it would keep you up. It's
Yeah,
definitely
and
a pain.
and I wonder if it's going to lead to companies wanting to actually host more software internally and move services behind a private data center type item, right? Or running different types of software versus a third party, right? Running it in a managed scenario.
Yeah, I mean, the whole trend with all of IT has been, moving stuff out of your four walls, the cloud and everything else like that. I do wonder if there will be a shift back, even perhaps just for very like core services and stuff like that.
Yeah,
But
I mean, I think there may be some reactions where some people may actually do that. I'm still a big believer in cloud technology and SaaS and all that, and I think there are other benefits from it, but
mhm.
there is risk, and there are things you got to make sure you stay on top of. Is what do I trust this vendor, and how much time are they putting into it, and what happens if they get compromised?
All right, well, before we move on, we have to have a word from our sponsor from today, Trend Micro. Hybrid work, cloud adoption, and shadow IT have introduced new cybersecurity risks to organizations. Security leaders are left asking, how can I manage our expanding attack surface? Trend Micro, the global leader in cybersecurity, is bringing the cyber risk conversation to more than 120 cities in their Risk to Resilience World Tour. Hear from experts on the latest threat landscape trends, solutions, and platform strategies to manage risk and defend your organization. with speed and accuracy. Find the closest city to you and register today to take a leap towards a more resilient future. Head on over to trendmicro.com/CISO series to learn more. New ChatGPT attack technique spreads malicious packages. Vulcan Cyber's Voyager 18 research team published an advisory this week that, based on a proof of concept, identified a package spreading technique called AI package hallucination. This involves posing a question to ChatGPT, requesting a package to resolve a coding problem, and receiving multiple package recommendations, including some not published in legitimate repositories. By replacing these non-existent packages with their own malicious ones, kind of heading them off at the pass, attackers can deceive future users who rely on ChatGPT's recommendations. So, Josh, here, rather than writing code, ChatGPT is essentially using a spoofing technique to sneak in through the front door, at least kind of reverse engineered to being able to do so. With ChatGPT being so openly accessible, how does this type of deception, how do we challenge it?
I mean, it's a tough one, right? So I think, one of the things that I tell my teams and anybody I talk to that's, working with ChatGPT is, verify everything that you get from it. Don't just blindly trust what it provides you. So if you're asking it to create a script for you and it provides, various references or packages, validate them. Do that first before you start running this in a production environment, because you're only asking for something like this to happen, right? So how do we actually, stop that, right? Take a look at it. And also, I think, push back on these AI vendors and, and start asking them to actually add in some additional controls too, where, if they do see a URL that happens to be something that's fake, there's something that they should be able to catch, midstream and actually kind of, provide some additional context there. Right? How to, it requires both sides.
Yeah, definitely. And this, I think this speaks to the relative infancy. I mean, definitely the infancy of kind of this generative AI industry, that we have these general use tools that don't have the controls that they would have if this was specifically like an enterprise solution or something like that. Like,
Yeah.
it's interesting that this is Chat GPT. It's not Microsoft Copilot that are hallucinating these packages
Right.
necessarily. So, I think as these tools become more industry focused, I don't want to say that will sort itself out, but we'll likely see those kind of controls that you're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's typical of pretty much any kind of, new emerging technology, is that we do see these types of abuses and these types of ways to get around it. And I've been in this industry for 25 years. I've seen it every time something new comes out. There's a whole new wave of different types of attacks. And then it takes time for kind of the security industry to catch up and the vendors to actually put in controls. I think we're still in the infancy, like you said.
Yeah. It turns out when you give hackers new toys, they like to break
Yeah,
all those
exactly.
things.
They want to use the same stuff we want to use.
All right, well, next story here. Passkeys arrive at Google in one password. This week, Google added passkey support for workspace admins, meaning they can now enable users to sign into either a workspace or a Google Cloud account using a passkey, no password required, Phil Collins style. Also, Password Manager 1Password has launched its public beta for passkeys, which will allow users to replace passwords with authentication systems built into their browsers for supported websites. These passkeys can only be created for websites and services that have rolled out their own passkey support. Obviously, they're not going to be doing that kind of back-end infrastructure stuff. So, Josh, many security experts have been looking forward to the day that passwords are no longer a first line of defense. You see passkeys as being a better solution, and do you think it'll quickly catch on? Given that we're kind of seeing some ecosystems maybe cropping up with some of these.
Yeah, I mean, I think by Google doing this, and the ecosystem's doing it, that's a huge push. That's a huge move in the right direction. And I look forward to the day that passwords are gone. Right? That's what we hear about in the news all the time. That's the cause of a significant number of the breaches, is that leaked credentials. Right? So how do we get around that? We got to eliminate the credentials. And then also, as the person that heads the IT team, I'd love to be able to tell my users, for certain types of scenarios, yeah, I need a password, right? To me, passwordless is kind of like the best of both worlds. We actually get enhanced security and we get enhanced usability. So, can we get to passwordless sooner than later? I hope so. I want it. I want it already. I want it for myself. I'm tired of having to remember 30 different passwords.
Yeah, it is. What is remarkable about the passkey adoption kind of story that we're seeing is we're basically seeing the entire industry. Like, I can't think of one company that's like, nope, we're sticking with
Yeah, exactly.
passwords. This
Yeah.
is like everyone is
I
like,
love my password. I want it
yeah,
15 characters.
yeah, everyone is on board. Again, whether the interoperability story for like on a consumer level is there, but I think for enterprise, like all the tools are going to be there before too long,
Yeah.
which is encouraging.
Yeah, it's great.
All right, our next story here, SEC drops cases due to data protection failures. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission dismissed 42 cases due to its staff having access to documents only intended for judges. Some of these cases going back to like 2016. Due to insufficient safeguards within the agency, staffers could download restricted databases and share access through internal memos. The SEC said it found no evidence that the control deficiency resulted in harm to any respondent or affected the Commission's adjudication in any proceeding. That's the quote, but let's also keep in mind, except for the whole thing of having to dismiss these cases as a result of that failure. So here we see the end result of, I don't know, vulnerabilities rather than just looking at malware or security practices in isolation. Like this is having an operational effect just for compliance. Do you see the dismissal of cases like this, Josh, to represent a crumbling of infrastructure, at least a failure, a death by a thousand cuts type of thing?
I mean, whether it's a failure of infrastructure or just insufficient process on you're releasing a new technology, you're releasing a new system to do XYZ, right? And are you testing those assumptions, right? The assumption is that role A can't access the data, for this particular type of scenario, right? So,
Mhm.
you know, that's what happened. They didn't properly test it. They just assumed that everything was working fine, and lo and behold, there's kind of a pretty big impact. It seems like 42 of them being dismissed. I have no idea of the 42, but that doesn't sound like something minor from at least just looking at it from the article.
Yeah, and at least from all the reporting I've seen, this doesn't seem to be like, hey, we're trying to skirt the system. We want to get
Right.
these convictions. It was people acting in good faith, having access to this information. I mean,
Right.
my heart goes out to all those SEC staffers that have been working these cases potentially for years, and just to have them go up in smoke because of what I'm
Because
sure
of an
they,
oversight. Yeah.
of a process issue that
Yeah.
has to be maddening. So
Yeah.
my sympathies to SEC staffers everywhere.
100%.
And our last story here, Verizon releases its annual data breach investigations report. Verizon's 2023 data breach investigations report revealed that 3/4 of data breaches over the last year involved the human element, caused by employees falling for social engineering attacks, making errors, or just using their access maliciously. Verizon noted that in order to rein in these key trends, organizations need to focus on employee security hygiene, implementing true multi-factor authentication, and collaborating across organizations to share threat intelligence. So, Josh, does Verizon's suggestions point the finger once again at the individual employee, or do you see this as maybe placing the onus of responsibility on the company? The classic clarion call of insider threat. I guess where do you feel it should lie?
I mean, I think it's a shared responsibility, just like anything, right? It's not surprising to see that the DBIR have the same, just an increase in ransomware, an increase in the human level attacks. But it's not a user problem. It's not just an end user problem, right? We can't put the blame on them. It's also an infrastructure issue and a technology issue. We've got advanced technology. Why aren't the email providers doing more things to prevent phishing from winding up, right? We've invested in kind of business email compromise solutions at my current place, and these have a major impact. So why don't we see more of our vendors and our infrastructure, or email providers providing advanced tooling within their side to actually stop this, because it's obviously pretty impactful. So I think there's education, and there's hygiene from an end user standpoint, and I think MFA. Every vendor, everybody should be doing MFA, solid MFA. I'm still surprised to see like my banks that don't do MFA and they still do SMS
Hmm.
PIN codes.
Hmm.
It doesn't make any sense. So it's like, why aren't we doing more of that kind of stuff? So it's shared. It's not just the end user. It's not just the companies. It's both of us got to come together and say, how do we actually stop this from happening? Continuing to happen, because it's the same story over and over and over.
Yeah, and just a reminder: these DBIR reports that Verizon puts out, kind of required reading. They do, I mean, amongst a
Yeah.
ton of other reports out there, these are really good stuff. And as David pointed out in our chat, Verizon will hold briefings if you want to kind of go into the findings. If you're curious as a CISO about what they're finding, they're usually pretty happy to help. So
Yeah.
good for that. Thank you, David, for pointing that to us. Josh, before we get out of here, was there? Oh wait. Where can people find you online if they are so inclined to check out your great stuff?
LinkedIn is probably the easiest place to go check me out and see any of the posts I make, which is not super frequently. And then you can see some of my content on my personal website, joshuascott.net. Um,
Well, thank you so much, Joshua Scott, the head of security and IT at Postman, for coming back, dropping the knowledge with the great takes. Truly appreciate your time. We will have to have you back once again. I think you get a jacket if you come back one more
Oh,
time.
sweet. I
So
really want. I need it.
either that or a free smoothie. We can't. I forget
All right.
how it works.
Smoothie works too, but jacket would be better.
All right, and thank you also to our sponsor, Trend Micro. Discover, assess, mitigate. Also want to thank all of our commenters today for coming in. We can't get everything up on the screen, but we appreciate your feedback. We're trying to work that into integrating that into the show. So keep those comments coming. They help keep the conversation fresh, and we really do appreciate your time. We'll also be back next week with another episode of our Week in Review show. We will be here at 3:30 p.m. Eastern, 12:30 Pacific. In the meantime, you can get your daily news fix through cybersecurity headlines every single day. Just give us 6 minutes. We'll get you all caught up. That's just about it for us. I'm Rich Stroffolino, reminding you and yours to have a super sparkly day.
Cybersecurity headlines are available every weekday. Head to CISOSeries.com for the full stories behind the headlines.